I just want to say thank you from Criminal Law Society and the American Constitution Society. We're really grateful to be able to host Professor Lain. I'll give just a little brief introduction, but Professor Corinna Lain is the S.D. Roberts and Sandra Moore Professor of Law at the University of Richmond School of Law. Professor Lain's scholarship focuses on two areas, the Supreme Court decision-making and the death penalty, and she has published numerous articles and essays about lethal injection over the last decade. She's a former prosecutor and a veteran, having served as a sergeant in the U.S. Army. And this event is also being broadcast over Zoom for alumni, and because Professor Lain has been working with the Indiana Abolition Coalition and to make it accessible to their members. You can find more information at inabolition.org. So we're really grateful to have her. We'll let her and Professor Beety kind of just take over and talk about her book. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. I'm Valena Beety. I teach criminal law, criminal procedure, and wrongful convictions. And wrongful convictions over the past about 25 years have been a real motivation for states to repeal the death penalty. We know that there have been and there continue to be people on death row who are factually innocent of their convictions. So that hand in hand with what we see as rising costs to execute people have been prime motivations, including in our own state, to look at repealing the death penalty. And we're so fortunate to have Professor Lain here today to talk about her book and to share with us her insights, her knowledge, and also her journey in writing this book. So Professor Lain, can you just give us a little bit of background on how did we come to this space of lethal injection being the primary mode of execution in states? How did lethal injection even come to be?
Yeah, happy. And first, let me just say thank you all for being here. It's a real honor to be here, and you have one of the top criminal law scholars in the country. I hope you know that. Like she's very beloved, but also her work is very, very well regarded. So I'm very, very happy to be here.
Yeah. And can I ask you,
yes.
Can you hold up your book for everyone just so we can all see it?
Secrets of the Killing State, the untold story of lethal injection.
Thank you.
And you know, before I tell you about how we got here, which is the best first ever question, you mentioned the exonerations, wrongful convictions, and I know that's your work. And so I thought I'd just throw out, you know, a little fact, because I am a death penalty scholar. So I've been studying the death penalty and writing about it for 18 years now. And by way of wrongful convictions, in this country, we have executed over 1,600 people, maybe it's 1,620 or 30, in the last, since 1976, which is the modern era of the death penalty. So in the last 50 years, about 1,600. So it's slightly over 1,600, and we have just over 200 exonerations, factual exonerations from death row. I think we're at 201 now. And so when you put all that together over the same period of time, it's like for every 8 people we execute, there is one person that we say, oops, sorry about that, we were wrong. That's just the people that we admit we got it wrong. But it's 8 to 1, which I don't know about you all, but I just think that's a terrible statistic under any, you know, by any measure.
And especially for executing someone, right? You can't take that back. You can take back a life sentence. You can't take back an execution.
Yeah, and the National Academy of Sciences came out with a report. It was peer reviewed at the highest level. I barely understand the methodology, but they came out with a report and said they estimate that 4.1% of the people on death row today are factually innocent. So 1 in 25. And they're like, the problem is everyone's saying, yeah, it's me, right? We don't know who those people are yet. But 1 in 25 also is a pretty, knowing that that's the error rate. And they say it's conservative. That's a conservative estimate. But anyway, that is not what we're here.
That groundwork and that framing for this very important discussion today.
But as to how we got here, the story actually starts in 1977. Lethal injection was invented in 1977. And the historical timing is actually really important because, as some of you may know, the United States Supreme Court struck down the death penalty as it then existed in 1972 and then brought it back in 1976. So there was actually a 4-year period where the United States did not have a death penalty. But so we've got this brand new death penalty. The modern era begins in 1976 with Gregg versus Georgia, the case that brought it back. And by 1977, so we've got this brand new death penalty, and the country had not seen an execution in 10 years. The last execution had been 1967 in Colorado. So you've got, imagine what that would be like if the entire country, we haven't seen an execution in a decade. And we've got this new death penalty. And so one of the things, and I am a legal historian, so one of the things I document is legislators around the country saying, I don't know that this country's going to be able to stomach this sort of state violence and, just brutality that executions entail. Because at the time, it was the gas chamber and the electric chair. And they're both gruesome deaths. And in fact, the electric chair is the only execution method that 2 states have themselves said violate the Eighth Amendment. It's the state version of the Eighth Amendment. And those states are Nebraska and Georgia. And I'm like, yeah, right? I'm like, okay, if Georgia says like, no, that's bad, then it's really bad. So anyway, that was basically what they were using. The gas chamber was considered like too gross. So there was a couple states using it, but it was basically the electric chair. And another piece of this story that most people don't know, I didn't know until I started looking at it, was at the time, a federal court had found a First Amendment right to televise executions. So it wouldn't last, but nobody could have known that at the time. And so there were also legislators, and I quote them in the book, that are saying, well, we can't have an electrocution in someone's living room. The public's not going to go for this. And so I think one of the really interesting things about the birth of lethal injection is some people were talking about a humane death, but there were a lot of people, I was shocked, that were talking about a humane looking death. And so we, fast forward, we get to 1977, and people are talking about, well, what about a death by drugs? What about that? And so now zoom into Oklahoma. That's where lethal injection was invented. And the legislators are asking their state medical boards, what about a death by drugs? They're asking their personal doctors, and nobody wants to play. And so this one legislator says, I'm going to ask the state medical examiner. And this is a man, his name is Dr. J. Chapman, and he refers to himself, wait a minute, I want to make sure I get it exactly right. Yeah, he refers to himself as, quote, an expert in dead bodies, but not an expert in getting them that way. And he comes up with the 3-drug protocol that every other state copied and would use for the next 35, 40 years. And I came across this interview of him where he was asked, how did you come up with the 3 drugs? Because the 3-drug protocol, not one of them is the same drug we use to put down pets. So I myself was like, where did he even get that? Like, where did this come from? And he said, and I'm gonna quote him, he said, quote, I didn't do any research. I just knew from having been placed under anesthesia myself what was needed. I wanted to have at least 2 drugs and doses that would each kill the prisoner to make sure if one didn't kill him, the other would. And then the interviewer said, well, why did you add a 3rd drug? And he said, why not? I didn't do any research. You wanted to make sure the prisoner was dead at the end, so why not add a 3rd drug? Why does it matter why I chose it? And what was shocking to me is that that was good enough for Oklahoma. Oklahoma adopted this without subjecting it to a shred of scientific scrutiny. No committee hearings, no expert testimony, no review of scientific or medical or veterinary literature. They adopted it in half a day. And then other states followed. And he was asked, like, well, you know, how do you feel about the fact that everyone just blindly followed you? And he said, I guess they just blindly followed it. Not in my wildest flight of fancy would I've ever thought it would have mushroomed into what it did. I was young at the time. I had no idea it would ever amount to anything except for Oklahoma. So that is how we got here. Yeah.
Well, and I appreciated you saying this concern about not necessarily a death that wasn't torture, but a death that didn't appear to be torture. So how is this cocktail of drugs, how does it work to make it appear that there is not torture?
Yeah, and you know, to your point, there's a legislator in Tennessee that I'm quoting people from wherever I can find their statements, but at the time lethal injection was adopted in Tennessee, the sponsor of the bill actually said, well, I don't want a humane execution. If I had my way, we'd draw and quarter them, but that ain't constitutional. So we might as well do this.
Right.
And so, you know, it's very interesting to me because I, of course, have tracked the litigation and I see the states coming in and the Supreme Court has said, well, the states they're doing the very best they can. And, you know, it's all about a humane execution with really, and they don't cite any, like there's nothing to cite. And I'm like, yeah, actually not so. So as to your question about, you know, why does it look humane? And it really does. I say that having not watched an execution, nor do I want to, but reading the accounts.
Sorry to interrupt, but be able to. I mean, going back to I was surprised by your point about the media and being able to publicize it, when here in Indiana, we've had difficulties with the media being able to witness recent executions.
Indiana is the only state in the country, I guess someone has said Wyoming, but they were not executing, but Indiana is the only state in the country that has conducted executions without media witnesses watching. And I think that was litigated and the court astoundingly said, well, the public can't come, so media can't either. And I remember reading that and thinking, the whole point of having the media there is that you are the eyes and ears for the public. That is the point. And so to not allow a media witness, an independent media witness, it's astounding to me and indefensible. And we have seen ways in which this matters, in the sense that there was an execution here in Indiana that people that were there, none were media witnesses, but people that were there said he was clearly struggling, he's gasping, he's doing these things, and he's, you know, writhing on the gurney. And the state came out, the Department of Corrections, you know, spokesperson said, no, that didn't happen. Right. And it's like, this is why we need the media. So it is very interesting. I'm going to circle around to that point, but you asked me about the drugs, and I'll just tell you the original 3-drug protocol, which every state used, is first an anesthetic. It was a barbiturate, a drug called sodium thiopental. Now, actually, states that use the 3-drug protocol actually use midazolam, which is Versed, which is not even an anesthetic. So that's scary in and of itself. But the first one's supposed to be an anesthetic. The second drug is very important. That drug is a paralytic. And it's not just a paralytic, it is also a muscle relaxant. And so it relaxes the muscles in the face, and then it freezes them that way. And so you're gonna get this really nice drifting off to forever sleep regardless of what is actually happening. And we now know from autopsies what is actually happening. As a court in Ohio said, we're essentially waterboarding people to death. So these autopsies are showing acute pulmonary edema. But, you know, I have more I want to talk about with the paralytic, because what's interesting is that when this was first devised, prisoners started suing, saying, execute me like a pet, put me down like a pet. That's a one-drug protocol, and most states in their veterinary statutes, which I've seen, explicitly by statute forbid a paralytic, right? Because we want to know if somebody is actually struggling. We want to see that because we actually care about a humane death. And so the prisoners start suing, saying, put me down like a pet. That's what we're asking for. And there's this litigation in Tennessee, which I talk about, an early case where they sue under the Non-Livestock Animal Humane Death Act. Non-Livestock Animal Humane Death Act. It's the cat and dogs, it's domestic animals. And they sue and they say, listen, we are animals and we are not livestock. So we are eligible to be put down like pets. And the Tennessee court says, legislative intent, this was for cats and dogs, it doesn't apply to you. And, you know, fair enough, but it's really something that the prisoners were suing under the Non-Livestock Humane Animal, Death Act, when they are human beings with constitutional rights to be not executed any way the state wants. One more point on that. So the litigation over this paralytic bubbles up, and it becomes the very first lethal injection case before the Supreme Court, and one of the 3 modern execution cases that we have. This is Bays versus Rees out of Kentucky, which I'm going to tonight. They had a challenge. Their first thing was put us down like pets, like use the one-drug protocol. And their alternative was, okay, well then don't use the paralytic. Just don't use the paralytic. If you're gonna continue, do the other 2 drugs, but don't use this middle one. And what they said was, look, the first drug is the one that's supposed to anesthetize us. We've got arguments about it, but that's what the first one's supposed to do. The third drug, which I haven't even talked about yet, is this potassium chloride. It's road salt. It's literally road salt. And it chemically burns the veins until it gets to the heart, where it induces a cardiac arrest, allegedly within 2 minutes. So they're like, listen, it's not the drug that anesthetizes us. It's not the drug that kills us. There's no legitimate state purpose here. This is purely cosmetic. And it paralyzes from the outside in. And so after you are chemically locked in, that's what they say, the last thing to be paralyzed is your core, and the muscles in your body's core, that's the diaphragm. And so the autopsies also show, distended veins as people are like inside as their diaphragm slowly becomes paralyzed. And the doctors say, yeah, it's the same as being buried alive, slowly. And so anyway, they make this challenge and they're like, there's no legitimate state purpose. It's unnecessary pain. Just get rid of the paralytic. It's completely superficial and cosmetic. And shockingly, the state does not deny it. Now, they didn't use those words, but what Kentucky said was, oh no, there is a legitimate state purpose. It's the legitimate state purpose in a dignified looking death. And the Supreme Court says that's good enough for us. And that is why we still have states using the paralytic. So that is the answer. So, and one more thing, here we are in Indiana, and again, the only state So I'm so happy to be passing through. This is a really important state. But, the anesthesiologist came out and said, listen, even if you have a paralytic, or if you have the one drug protocol, and some states are using this one drug pentobarbital protocol, which is problematic in its own way, but even if you have that, you're doing this massive overdose and it's gonna feel like, 1,000 pounds on you. And so they said, if someone's struggling, if someone's in pain, and they're feeling the weight of the paralytic or the weight of the pentobarbital, and so they can't move, look for little movements in the fingers, because the fingers are actually the place where you have the most control, and they're the last ones to go. So the anesthesiologists are like, look for little movements in the fingers. Several of these executions, they were like, we saw movements in the fingers. What are states doing now? They are taping down their fingers. They're in restraints. There is absolutely no reason to tape down their fingers other than they know. And they're doing it anyway, and they don't want anyone else to see it. So that's the sort of thing that led me write a book, where I said, everybody should know this stuff, because it is being done in your name.
Well, and this does seem related to the title of your book, Secrets of the Killing State, and this secrecy. Can you talk a bit more about why you chose this title and the role that secrecy is playing in states' decisions?
Yeah, secrecy is everything. So the last chapter of the book is called The Secrecy Solution. And it's because and by the way, this project, this is the product of 7 years of deep research into lethal injection across the country. So, just from seeing it as it plays out in the different states, the different protocols, all the different things. My research question, by the way, started as, why are states so bad at this? We do know how to put down our beloved pets. We put people under anesthesia every day. We cut open their chests. We do all sorts of super painful things. So why are they so bad at this? That's what started this project. But at some point it changed to, why are states sticking with lethal injection? They can't get the drugs. They can't get the medical professionals. They can't get access to the veins. These people have notoriously bad veins. They're an aging, geriatric, poor health, often former drug users. The last thing I could even imagine would be like, oh yeah, let's take a massive bolus overdose and stick it in somebody's veins that has super weak veins. But anyway, and it costs so much, which we should totally talk about. Indiana, hello. And they're breaking state and federal laws and falsifying prescriptions, and it's not even humane. So it was like, what is this all about? And I think the answer is secrecy. I think states can't really fix what's wrong with lethal injection. It's like the problems with lethal injection are inherent to using medicine to kill. You're not going to have medical professionals. You really need an anesthesiologist. They want nothing to do with this. Medical professionals want nothing to do with this. There's one who I quote in the book who said, asking a medical professional to help the state kill better is like asking a lifeguard to help you drown better. It's something that their entire being, it's not just like legal ethics and we accept them and we embrace them. It's like, no, healing is who we are. It is baked into the idea of being a medical professional. So you're not going to be able to fix these things. You're not going to be able to get the drugs. You're not going to be able to get into the veins. And so it's like, what is this? They can't fix it, so they hide it. That's the secrecy solution. There's nothing to do but hide it. When I think about what the work that lethal injection is doing, it's secrecy more largely. And so I think, when we talk about the death penalty in this country, we talk about it as an idea? Like, are you for it or against it? Often on tribal lines. It stands for something. It's like law and order, right? It stands for something. And I think lethal injection is doing tremendous work in keeping the death penalty as an idea. And here's what I mean. Like, with lethal injection, we don't have to see the sight of blood, like with the firing squad. We don't have to smell the sickly smell of burning flesh. That's the electric chair. We don't have to see people gasping and retching and spitting up and convulsing. That's the gas chamber and the gas mask. We get to tell ourselves that these people are just falling into forever sleep. And that, it's like out of sight, out of mind. That allows us to not think about what the death penalty actually is, which is like the ultimate state violence. It hides it, like lethal injection hides it entirely, and allows us to tell ourselves this other narrative. We don't have to think about violence. And then the paralytic is more secrecy. And then if you want even more secrecy, the states, and I document this around the country, if an execution starts going wrong, they just lower the blinds.
Right.
I just came out of Missouri, and one of the vignettes in the book is about this doctor. So once in a while you do have a doctor involved, but even he said, yeah, but I don't push the syringes. By the way, do you know who pushes the syringes? Do y'all have a guess as to who's doing that?
Well, they're corrections and officers who have no training whatsoever in medical protocol, and often I know that in Florida and maybe in Indiana, they actually bring people from the outside to the prisons.
Yeah,
That's my understanding.
So, she's right. The people, this was a shock to me. I don't know. There were many points in this book where I was like, I'm supposed to be some kind of death penalty expert. Why do I not know any of this? And, but the people who are pushing the syringes, who are actually doing the execution, are non-medical prison guards. And they're doing it from another room through 7 feet of tubing. And if you ask them, like, well, how do you know how fast to push the plunger? Because if you push it too fast, I document every which way this can go wrong, but the catheter can pop out and spray drugs across the room. That's happened. Like, all of these things have happened. So if you ask them, like, it's really important to do it at a certain, speed and such, and they'll just say, we do it by feel. And the medical professionals are like, blah, what feel? Like, there's no feel. There is no feel from the next room through 7 feet of tubing. So, what I think of this doctor who wrote, he said, the heart stops reluctantly. And he was talking about, it's not in the book, and I wish I had put it there, but he's talking about how, like, before the body is ready to die on its own, it takes physical force, it takes violence to end life before the body's ready to end it itself. And it could be a car accident, it could be a homicide, it could be an execution, but like, it takes violence to stop the heart before the heart is ready to stop on its own. And what's special about lethal injection is it hides the violence, completely secretized.
So you have spent 7 years researching this book. How or in what way have your own insights and perspectives on the death penalty changed over this journey?
Yeah, that's such a good question. This book has changed me. My views about the death penalty have changed over time. I grew up in Montana. I would say Montana is not that different from Texas. I'm a former prosecutor. I did not have any capital cases, but I had murder cases, and my specialty was child sexual assaults. So I've seen a lot. And so, you know, studying the death penalty, like I will say to people, I think the death penalty can be a really hard issue. It's not hard for me, but I've been studying it for 18 years. And my views have changed over time. This book was like yet another shifting in my views. And I'll tell you why. Because I'm studying lethal injection, right? But studying lethal injection is studying executions. And studying executions forced me to see who these people are at the end. Not who they were at the time of their terrible, terrible crime. Not who they were at the time of trial. They're not remorseful, mostly. But who are they 15, 17, 20, 25, 30 years later? You know, Mississippi executed a guy this summer. He was on death row for 50 years. It's like, you know, they're not the same person that they were. And, you know, so I have this little 3-page epilogue where I talk about how this has changed me in the sense that I say, you know, I think we tend to freeze these people in this moment in time. And I myself have done so for years. I study the death penalty and I'm like, here's my critique. You know, I teach a death penalty class, and I had a student last spring come up and to me after the exam and say, so are you for it or against it? You know, because I critique, but I'm not like, you know, I think there's an underlying moral issue that I'm not going to tell people how to feel about it. But this book, you know, I now understand these people are not the same person that they were. And it's funny because I was writing about this, and this case comes across my desk. It's Brian Dorsey in Missouri. And this guy, you know, I get these Google News alerts. And so it was just a Google News alert that came across my desk. It was an op-ed written by prison guards. And so I was like, that's very interesting. What is their op-ed? Here it is. Here's the title. We corrections officers know Brian Dorsey has changed. Governor Parson, don't execute him. So I see this and I'm like, so that's interesting. I'm totally gonna read that. And I read it and they're talking about this guy, double homicide, like a terrible, I mean, any homicide is terrible, but he's sentenced to death for killed 2 people. And it's 17 years later. And he's the prison barber. And he cut the hair not only of all the other prisoners, but by choice, the other prison guards, including the 2 wardens. And they say, you know, it's like, quote, Mr. Dorsey is an excellent barber and a kind and respectful man. There's not a nicer guy than Brian. And they go on to say, and I'm quoting the op-ed, taking Dorsey's life would be especially traumatizing for the many current and former prison staff members, myself included, who have come to respect and care for this exemplary inmate. And, you know, it's something that I found again and again, not just like, oh, wait, you know, this person for their last meal said, I don't want the last meal. Can you donate a pizza to a homeless shelter? Or, you know, one guy this summer, I think this was South Carolina, for my last meal, can I get 2 buckets of chicken? I don't want a single piece of it. Can you feed the other men on death row? You know, or writing a poem to console the prisoners who have to kill them. You know, it's just, you know, Alabama this summer executed a guy. He was on death row, I think 27, 30 years. He finds faith. He starts the Church of Death Row. for death row. And Alabama executes him, and the prison chaplain comes out and says to the media, "Scarcely have I experienced such holiness in my life." And that guy you just killed, he was bringing people to Christ that none of the rest of us could reach. And it took somebody saying, "I know the depths of despair. I know the depths of self-hatred. Let me tell you about this God I know. And you cannot out-sin grace." You know, and it's like, that's who we're actually killing. And how could I not know that and have studied the death penalty for 18 years? You know, it was this project that that showed me that. And so there are places in the book where I quote the prison guards who say, I mean, this is a good point. So, you know, there's prison guards who say, look, by the time an execution warrant comes down, we know this isn't the same person. It's a couple decades later. We know they could be safely housed for the rest of their life, save millions. We still need to talk about that, Indiana. But, you know, and we've gotten to know them as a human being, and then we have to kill them. And you can't expect there won't be an effect from that. And so I document, you know, depression, suicidal thoughts, divorce, alcoholism, drug use. And, you know, they talk about how it is to have to kill someone for a job when they're like, you know, I've had media people say, oh yeah, I would go out and get a drink with that guy. Yes, he did this terrible thing. It was 30 years ago. And you're not ever gonna let him out, but do you have to kill them? And then there's this one other guy.
And Professor Lain,
sorry.
I know
we gotta go. Huh?
We're short on
Okay,
time,
yeah.
and we want to make sure to open it up to questions from the audience. I have a ton more questions.
Yeah, so sorry.
But can I briefly ask you about, you sound like you want to share some insights about the cost of the death penalty for Indiana.
Yes. So I brought those just because Indiana just spent $900,000 on drugs for a single execution. That was December 2024. $900,000. I just want to say, what could you do with $900,000? And then I was looking, there was a legislative services agency for the General Assembly. So this is nonpartisan. This is your General Assembly. Did a 2015 cost study, and the cost of a capital murder case, just to try it in front of a jury, is more than 4.2 times greater than the cost to try a murder case to the jury when you're seeking life without parole. So jury to jury, it's more than 4 times. And then they said, even if you resolve the capital case with a plea, so you never get to a jury, it's still 2.3 times more expensive than trying the case to the jury for life without parole. And, you know, those costs are incurred whether you get the death penalty or not. They're incurred at trial. This is the cost of trying the case. It's millions. And I tracked, I think I looked the last 6, there were 6 cases since 2021 that where prosecutors went for death. Not a single one of them resulted in death. So it's just like all money straight down the drain.
Right. So the jury chose life in each of those cases, life in prison.
Yeah.
Well, let's open it up for questions. I see someone in the back, yes.
So I was curious, I don't know if you're familiar with this or if you have read statistics on it, but do you see the same kind of like rehabilitation in folks that are incarcerated for life versus people that are on death row?
Yeah, I do, although that's not my specialty. And so, you know, I can't speak to the same incidents, but here's an interesting, like, little one. Do any of you know who Tex Watson is or was? Anybody heard of like Helter Skelter?
Oh, yes.
Right? This is, who was the guy, the Helter Skelter guy? Charlie Manson, thank you. So Tex Watson was Charlie Manson's right-hand man. And Charlie Manson was the cult leader, but Tex Watson was the guy that did all the killings. And you may know, like, they broke into some house and they like killed this pregnant woman and, you know, smeared blood on the walls. It was terrible, terrible, terrible. He gets the death penalty. It's in maybe late 60s, early 70s. The Supreme Court strikes down the death penalty in 1972. So all of those cases are converted to life without parole. And so I was curious, like, where's that guy now? What is happening with that guy now? He has started this men's prison ministry that has totally taken off. And, you know, and so people are talking about him like, and he says, look, I could never undo. I can never pay back. I can never do this. But what I can do is serve with every day of my life. And so, like, do I know the incidents the same? No, because I was studying executions. So I'm studying these people. And it's off the charts. But what I know from those life sentences, it's happening to them too. Yeah. Over here in the back, yeah.
You mentioned that the lethal injection sort of gave legs to the death penalty.
Yeah.
Because it seemed more humane. In your opinion, do you think that nitrogen gas chambers are going to give lethal injection more legs? Because I saw that some state just did a nitrogen gas chamber.
Alabama.
And it's awful.
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
That's going to happen?
No, I don't. I mean, this is like the heart stops reluctantly. There's really no like good way to kill people. And the thing about nitrogen gas is you can see all of it. And that guy, I think he gasped and struggled. It was more than 20 minutes. But the average length of time for even the one drug protocol is 18 minutes. And the autopsies are showing 84% of autopsies are showing acute pulmonary edema. So these people are drowning in their own fluids. And so, you know, I think it could go back to lethal injection if people don't know. And that's part of my project, you know, is to say, this is what this is about. And, you know, this isn't a book where I make an argument and try to convince you I'm right. This is a book where all I do is relentlessly document what the state's doing in our name. And the very end is like, you have to decide if this is okay with you. Like, that's the argument. So, you know. Yeah.
Have you received any like negative feedback from your book or from people who have an interest in like maintaining the secrecy?
Yeah, no. So the really interesting thing is I kind of have been all over. This book tour is 90 days, 32 cities. I've done over 40 events now, a lot of podcasts. And it's really interesting because mum's the word. And I asked a guy in Arizona who tracks this litigation. I was like, you know, I haven't had a single DOC, you know, Department of Corrections person, like nobody's come out and said she's wrong. And part of that might be that I have 70 pages of endnotes, slightly over 1,000 endnotes in the back. So as I say in the introduction, I brought the receipts. But, you know, I'm like, why? It's just weird to me. And his view was they have nothing to say because you document everything. And so they're just hoping you get done with your tour and go back to your life. If they engage with you, they're bringing more attention to it. So they're just not saying anything. I will say I've had several book reviews and I've gotten one bad book review. You can go find it. But the reason it was bad is because she wanted a tome that was anti-death penalty. She was like, you didn't talk about racism. You didn't talk about actual innocence. You didn't talk about all these things, which you should have. And I frankly was like, I love that you talked about it. I gave you an opportunity to talk about it, and I'm a researcher. I'm not an activist. I am a researcher, and I do have a point of view, but as I say in the introduction, I just want to show you my research and y'all figure it out. So that isn't the kind of book that I was going to write. That's it for the negative.
Yes, right here in front.
Can I just say, I'm an activist and I commend you for what you're doing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here today for writing this book. I'm looking forward to reading it because I do think, as you say, it's important to pull back the curtain and sort of expose. I'm interested in sort of, as you're talking about, right, these like conditions of killing and like the humane versus inhumane, the a wrongful conviction versus a correct conviction. There's the idea of like expensive versus cheap, if they're changed or if they're not. And I mean, I think it's interesting because for me, it comes down to just this idea of like, it's just immoral. And like, so it could be cheap, it could be humane. Somebody could be like, I'll do it again, and it's still wrong to kill them.
I get it.
And I would be interested to hear your perspective, because I think that there's this broad movement, obviously it's still a very divisive issue, but there's this broad movement to like abolish the death penalty.
Yeah.
Versus I think that like prison abolition as like a larger concept is still very much like this sort of like niche, fringe, like radical idea. I'm interested with your research on like peeling back the curtain on the death penalty and seeing like the horrors behind it. Do you have any, I would be very interested in your perspective on like how you think that relates to broader abolition, or like peeling back the curtain on incarceration as a whole.
Okay. So as to the broader abolition movement, one of the interesting things I think is that as I was going through this, I was thinking, why is there no book on lethal injection? It's the number, 98% of all executions over the last 50 years have been by lethal injection. We have a book on everything. Why is there no book on this? And what I came to think of is, well, I think that the abolition movement is like, I'm really not interested in a project about how we kill, because I think we shouldn't be killing at all. So it seems really weird to talk about how we kill, because that assumes there's a good way to kill and there's a bad way to kill. And so I think it wouldn't have come from that leg. And I think death penalty supporters definitely are not interested in hearing what I, necessarily have to say, although I've changed people's minds. And so it had to come from an academic, being an academic and having a research question. And so it's not, one of the things I say in the introduction is this is a book about how we kill. It's not a book about whether we should kill, although it has implications, and people will disagree about what those implications are. Now, I will tell you when I think of my book, and it's not in here, and I know we're online, hi everyone, but I think if I had an argument to make, one of the things I would say is this is a book about all the ways that the state cannot be trusted to take life, and all the ways the state has tried to cover it up. And when I think about the death penalty, what I generally hear is they deserve it. And I might disagree on that for reasons we've talked about, but I think that's just half of the equation. I think half of the equation is whether they deserve it. I think the other half is, did the state do what it needs to do to deserve to take that life? And it's like, just because something did something, you don't get to just go grab them and shoot them. Like just because you might have an undocumented person here, you don't just get to like grab them and put them on a plane, right? There's an actual process, and it's really important for the state. And I used to be part of the state. They're supposed to wear the white hats. They need to follow the law. And so that's how I feel about that. As to the larger movement, one thing I would just say is a question I've asked myself, which is, the death penalty is this little dark corner of the criminal law. Death sentencing, by the way, the death penalty is dying. Death sentencing is down 80% over the last 2 decades. 2004, 125 new death sentences. 2024, last year that we have full available data, it's 26. and if you want to know where the death penalty is going, you've got to look at death sentencing. We're having a spike in executions, but it's like today's sentences are tomorrow's executions. So you've got to look there. But, you think of it, I think of it as this like a really dark little corner. And so one question might be, when we have mass incarceration, when we have bad prison conditions, when we have all of these other problems, why should we care about the death penalty? And my answer is, if you're willing to kill someone for what they did, if you're willing to kill somebody, everything else is on the table. Everything. You have to dehumanize, to kill. And, this goes back to the prison guard who's haunts me. He said, it used to really bother me to conduct these executions. It was really hard, but now it ain't no different than getting a beer out of the fridge. And I just want to say to executing states, which of these is okay with you, right? You have to dehumanize to kill somebody. You have to. And if you're going to do that, well, then you're really saying like there's no light to them. They have zero worth. I'm not even thinking of them as humans. So it's like bad prison conditions, you're lucky to be alive. Mass incarceration, we could have killed you. And so I'm not saying that these other problems will go away if we get rid of the death penalty, but I will say, I think it's hard to make real progress on some of these other problems when we still think it's okay to just kill people.
Do we want to do one more question? Christian, I saw you had? No, okay. There's someone else with?
Actually, yeah, I'll go. So my question was, just hearing about the 3-drug injection, I always thought it was kind of weird. I didn't know where it was coming from. Has the Supreme Court really been pressed on the origin of lethal injection? Is this something that the court is even really supposed to be able to handle when it comes to what the state can actually do when it comes to the Eighth Amendment? Is there anything on that?
Yeah, so Bays versus Rees, it was actually in the trial court's record that, and this was for Kentucky, that Kentucky had done no research, that Kentucky had carelessly copied a protocol that had been carelessly devised in the first place. And it's not like the court didn't know it, because there was a concurrence that was like, this is really bad. Why are we deferring to prison officials like we do with agencies with expertise? They have no expertise, and it didn't make any difference. I know we're gonna run short of time, so I won't go into the other 2 decisions, but I will say this, every time, lethal injection is so bad that every time the court sets a standard, they meet it. And in that case, the court is like, oh, well, also there's this other thing you have to do. And I know we didn't tell you before, and so you didn't do it, but we're telling you now and you didn't do it, so you lose. And all 3 cases are like that. And so for me, I was like, I think I'm writing this for the public. I'm not sure the courts are really here to protect, or that the Eighth Amendment protection is anything that anyone can rely on at this point in time.
If you have more questions, I encourage you to come down and talk to Professor Lain. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Lain.